It was a Tuesday evening, one of those ordinary nights that you barely remember until something extraordinary happens. I had reheated yesterday's chicken and potatoes, the kind of simple dinner Thomas always ate without a word. He sat across from me, chewing mechanically, flipping through his phone as if nothing in the world could disturb him. And then somewhere between two bites, he looked up with that cold detachment of his and said, "Grace, I think it's time we do a DNA test for Jacob." For a moment, I didn't even process the words. I thought he was joking, some dark attempt at humor, but there was no smirk on his face, no trace of sarcasm in his voice. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the table rather than on me. The fork clattered against his plate, a sharp sound in the silence of our kitchen. My chest tightened as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. 15 years we had been raising Jacob together, for 15 years, every sleepless night when colic kept him crying until dawn, every scraped knee, every science project, every soccer game in the rain. We were a team. At least I believed we were. Now, my husband was questioning it all. "Are you out of your mind?" I forced a laugh, hoping he would crack a smile, admit it was nonsense. But he didn't. His face stayed still, carved in stone. The absurdity of it made me dizzy. I could still see him standing in that delivery room, tears streaking down his cheeks the first time he held Jacob. Thomas never cried, not even at his mother's funeral. But he wept that day, clutching our newborn as though the world had finally given him a reason to feel. I held on to that memory like a lifeline, but now it felt like a trick of the mind. I didn't shout at him. I didn't throw the plate or demand how he could dare insult me like this. Instead, I went through the motions of the night as if nothing had happened, then lay awake beside him in the dark. He slept soundly, his breathing steady, while I stared at the ceiling fan, counting the turns of its blades, wondering how my life had suddenly veered off course. For the next 2 days, the silence between us grew unbearable. He left for work earlier than usual, came home late, barely looked at me, and then without further discussion, we were sitting side by side in a private clinic, waiting for the nurse to call us in. Jacob had asked that morning why we were all going to see a doctor. Thomas, calm and clipped, told him it was just a routine checkup, some blood work. I couldn't bring myself to contradict him. I didn't tell my sister Anna, who called me every night to check in, or my best friend Vicky, who always had opinions about men. I carried the weight of it alone because saying it aloud felt like admitting it might be true. The nurse greeted us too cheerfully, as though she hadn't noticed the tension radiating from our chairs. Her smile felt like a spotlight on my shame. Did she see me as the unfaithful wife? Did she see Thomas as the wronged husband? Or maybe she just saw us as another couple slowly unraveling in her waiting room. When she swabbed Jacob's cheek, he winced and looked at me for reassurance. I smiled, but inside I was shaking. Thomas didn't smile, didn't even meet my eyes. He signed the paperwork with a steady hand, as if this were nothing more than a tax form or an oil change. I sat there, silent, trying to hold myself together, feeling as though the walls of the clinic were closing in on me. And that was the moment it truly sank in. My husband, the man who had once cried with joy in a hospital room 15 years ago, no longer trusted me. And in his silence, in his coldness, I realized this test would not only question Jacob's bloodline, it would test the very foundation of my marriage. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Each hour dragged heavy and silent. Thomas barely spoke to me at all. He left for work before dawn, came home long after sunset, and when he did sit down at the table, he ate quickly and mechanically, as though my presence was an inconvenience rather than a comfort. At first, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I folded his shirts, left his coffee in the thermos by the door, even set the table the way I always had. But the silence between us was like a solid wall, growing taller with each passing day. Jacob noticed it before I could mask it. One evening, while pushing the peas around his plate, he whispered, "Mom, is Dad mad at me?" His big brown eyes were searching for reassurance, for a simple answer that could make it all disappear. My throat tightened, but I forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. He's just tired. Work has been hard." The lie tasted bitter, but what else could I tell him? That his father questioned whether he even belonged to him? That our entire family balance was hanging by a thread? When Anna called me that night, her voice warm and familiar through the receiver, I wanted to spill everything. She had always been my anchor, the one who reminded me who I was when life got dark. But instead, I just told her I was tired. She hesitated, then sighed. "You know, Grace, Thomas has always had this streak. Remember how he used to question me about every detail when I babysat Jacob? He worried about the most absurd things. I told myself it was because he cared too much. But sometimes I think he just doesn't know how to trust." Her words dug into me because I remembered it too. Years ago, when Jacob was still a toddler, Thomas had accused me of leaving the back door unlocked after I ran in from the garden. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. But he stared at me with those same cold eyes, as if my word wasn't enough. Some wounds never heal. They scab over and then split open with the slightest touch. Within minutes, as though his conscience was clear. While I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator downstairs, I counted the ticks of the clock, each second dragging like a drop of water in a cavern. I began to wonder what had planted this seed of suspicion in him. Had someone said something about Jacob not looking like him? Had one of his friends made a thoughtless comment? It was ridiculous, because Jacob had his same dimpled chin, his same curly hair, even the same expression when he was angry. But logic didn't matter. The doubt had taken root in Thomas's mind, and it was spreading like ivy, wrapping around every corner of our lives. By the fifth night, the silence was so suffocating I wanted to scream. I watched Thomas bury himself in the sports section, ignoring me. And I realized he wasn't just doubting Jacob. He was already doubting me. And there was nothing I could do but wait for the verdict that would either clear me or destroy everything we had built. The morning we were supposed to get the results, I couldn't even drink my coffee. The mug sat untouched on the table, steam fading into nothing, while I chewed at my lip until it bled. My hands wouldn't stay still. I kept wringing them, nails pressing into my palms. Jacob had already left for school, thank God. I couldn't bear for him to see me like this. Thomas drove us to the clinic without a word. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. I sat rigid in the passenger seat, staring out the window, each streetlight and familiar corner blurring past. My stomach twisted with every turn. At the reception desk, the woman greeted us too brightly, as if we were just another set of anxious parents waiting on routine lab work. I felt Thomas lean back in his chair beside me, exhaling through his nose as though confirming what he had suspected all along. "I knew it," he muttered. But the doctor wasn't finished. His eyes shifted to me, and for the first time there was something in his gaze that unsettled me more than judgment. It was concern, professional, urgent concern. "There is more," he said carefully. "One job, Grace. One. And look what you've done to us." I opened my mouth, but no words came. What was there to say? I had carried that boy. I had bled for him, held him against my chest, kissed every bruise, soothed every nightmare. But a piece of paper was telling my husband otherwise. By the time we got home, the silence was heavier than any screaming could have been. Thomas slammed the door to the guest room, and I realized he wasn't coming back to our bed. He wasn't coming back to me at all. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a shoebox of mementos, Jacob's hospital bracelet, his newborn photo, the discharge papers. I traced my fingers over them, desperate for proof that I hadn't imagined 15 years of motherhood. And yet a seed of doubt crept in, dark and suffocating. If Jacob wasn't mine, if he wasn't Thomas's either, then whose child had I been holding all these years? And that was the moment another possibility slashed through me like ice. What if there had been a mistake at the hospital? What if Jacob wasn't stolen from us but swapped with someone else's baby that night 15 years ago? That night, after Thomas slammed the guest room door and the house fell silent, I pulled down an old shoebox from the top shelf of our closet. My hands trembled as I set it on the kitchen table. Inside were fragments of a life I thought I understood. Jacob's hospital bracelet, creased copies of birth records, photographs yellowing at the edges. I spread them out under the dim kitchen light, desperate for something solid to hold on to. One picture stopped me cold. I was pale, still weak from surgery, cradling Jacob in my arms, but just over my shoulder stood a young nurse. Her eyes were wide, startled, as though she had been caught doing something she shouldn't. The badge on her chest was tilted, her blonde hair falling loose. For years I hadn't noticed her expression, but now I couldn't stop staring. Something about it unsettled me. The longer I looked, the more the thought clawed at me. What if Jacob had been switched that night? Not stolen, not abandoned, but swapped in the chaos of the maternity ward. The next morning I dialed the hospital number printed on the back of the discharge papers. My voice shook as I explained who I was, what had happened, what I suspected. There was a long pause before the operator replied in a clipped, professional tone. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. Those records are confidential. Unless you have a court order, we cannot release information. Confidential." That word hit me like a slap. My entire life was collapsing, my family falling apart, and all they had to offer me was policy. I hung up with my hands trembling so badly I could barely press the button. But I wasn't finished. If they wouldn't help me over the phone, I would go there myself. Driving back to the hospital after 15 years was like revisiting a battlefield. The entrance had changed, the signs updated, even the paint on the walls was brighter. But the parking lot was the same, the place where Thomas had paced nervously while I labored inside. I parked in almost the exact spot and sat there for a moment, trying to gather the courage to walk in. Inside, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee from the vending machine hit me instantly, sharp and nauseating. At the reception desk, I leaned in and whispered, "I need to speak with someone about possible newborn confusion from January 2009. Please, it's urgent." The clerk stared at me, torn between sympathy and suspicion. "Without a court order," she began. "I'm not asking for names." I cut her off, my voice breaking. Just look. See who else gave birth that day. My child may have been switched. Please." She hesitated, then glanced around nervously before disappearing into the back. I thought she'd left me hanging until 10 minutes later an older woman appeared. She had silver hair pulled back neatly, a badge that read, "Diana Whitmore, Patient Services Director." Her eyes were steady, kind, but guarded. "I remember you," she said softly before I could even speak. "You had an emergency C-section. It was complicated. We nearly lost you." My breath caught. "You remember me?" "I've worked here 40 years, she replied. "Some stories don't fade." She ushered me into her office, shut the door, and let me talk. I poured it all out. The DNA test, Thomas's reaction, the box of mementos, the photograph of the young nurse. She listened without interrupting, only nodding slowly, her expression grave. When I finished, she opened a tall cabinet and pulled out a thick folder covered in dust. January 2009, she murmured. We were transitioning to digital then, but a few paper records remain. Her finger traced the lines of handwritten notes. That day, there were 3 other deliveries. 2 boys, 1 girl. Yours was the only C-section. My pulse pounded in my ears. Could a mistake have happened? She exhaled long and heavy. 2 nurses were out sick. The staff was stretched thin. I won't lie, Mrs. Caldwell. Yes, it's possible. I gripped the edge of the desk to study myself. Possible. The word rang in my head like a bell. She closed the file and looked at me directly. There was a new nurse that week, very young. She didn't last long. Her name was Natalie Brooks. You might want to start there. I walked out of that hospital with my heart thudding, a single name echoing in my mind. Natalie Brooks, the nurse in the photograph, the girl with the guilty eyes, and maybe the key to the truth. I didn't know where to start, but Vicky, my best friend, didn't hesitate when I finally confided in her. You need a lawyer, she said flatly, as if the choice were obvious. Not just any lawyer, someone who knows how to fight hospitals, someone who won't back down. She gave me a name, Christopher Lane, and insisted I call. 2 days later, I was sitting in his office. He was in his 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a voice calm enough to steady me. As I laid out the entire story, the DNA results, the hospital visit, the name of the young nurse, he took notes in a yellow legal pad, nodding quietly. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, Grace, I need to be honest. If you go down this path, the truth may not bring comfort. It will bring answers, yes, but it will also bring pain. Families have been torn apart by less. Are you prepared for that? I swallowed hard. My life was already in ruins. Thomas had abandoned me. Jacob was slipping away into silence, and every breath I took felt heavier than the last. I just want to know what held me back. We found her, Natalie Brooks. She's living about 75 miles away out in a rural township, works as a florist. The word florist hit me strangely, from a hospital ward to a flower shop. It sounded almost poetic, but also like someone hiding from a past they couldn't erase. I couldn't wait another day. Against Christopher's advice to let the investigator handle it, I got into my car and drove. The road stretched long and empty, cracked asphalt winding through farmland. My thoughts pounded with every mile. What would I say to her? What if she denied everything? What if she confirmed it? The flower shop was small, wedged between a pharmacy and a bait and tackle store. Pink shutters, a painted sign with curling letters, and the scent of lies and eucalyptus spilling out onto the sidewalk. I pushed open the door. Behind the counter, a woman with her blonde hair twisted into a messy bun looked up and froze. Recognition flickered across her face. She knew me. Can I help you? She asked, but her voice had already lost its brightness. I stepped closer. Natalie Brooks. You worked at Harrisburg General in January 2009. Her hands tightened on the scissors she was holding. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she sat them down, closed her eyes, and whispered. I was 21. I really did. My voice cracked. You switched them. Her eyes filled with tears. Not intentionally, but when I realized later, I went to my supervisor. She told me I remember the other mother. She had red hair tied back in a ponytail. Her husband worked construction. Her name was Monica Reed. The name carved itself into me like fire. For the first time, there was a direction to my search, and with it, the terrifying possibility that somewhere out there, another boy, My boy had been living someone else. Worn couches, a crocheted blanket, faint music drifting from a bedroom upstairs. In the living room, a teenage boy sat hunched on the sofa, earbuds in. He barely glanced up, just long enough for me to see his profile, and my breath caught the angle of his jaw, the set of his brow. It was Thomas. I would have known it anywhere. "Ryan," Monica said gently, "say hello." The boy pulled out one earbud and gave me a polite nod, eyes narrowing with adolescent suspicion. I smiled weakly, my heart pounding. Jacob wasn't with me that first day. I needed to face this alone before I brought him into the storm. But even standing there, staring at Ryan, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Monica sat across from me, wringing her hands. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "For years, I felt something wasn't right. Ryan's blood type doesn't match mine or my husband's." The pediatrician brushed it off, said, "Those things happen, but I knew. I just never had proof." Her words pierced me. Two mothers, strangers, carrying the same doubt in silence for 15 years. I leaned forward, my voice shaking. I think our children were switched that night." She pressed her hands to her face, tears welling in her eyes. Dear God, we sat there in silence, the weight of the possibility filling the room like a storm cloud. Finally, I whispered, "Will you do a DNA test for Ryan, for Jacob, for all of us?" She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes." The days waiting for the results were the longest of my life. I thought waiting for Jacob's test had been unbearable, but this was worse. This time, I wasn't just waiting to see, whispered, "You are my son. No matter what paper says, no matter what blood proves, you are mine." In that moment, I understood that love was more powerful than DNA, more binding than any test, and no discovery, no courtroom, no cruel twist of fate would ever take Jacob away from me. Thomas grew colder with every passing day. Even after the DNA results, after the truth about Ryan and Jacob, he had no interest in piecing together what remained of our family. If anything, he seemed relieved to have an excuse to turn away from me completely. He left earlier for work, came home later, and when he did, he barely acknowledged me at all. I tried to focus on Jacob, on holding him close and reminding him that none of this changed my love for him. But even as I tried to stay strong for him, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that Thomas's distance wasn't only about the test results. Something else was going on. One afternoon, when I was paying bills, I logged into our bank account. I wasn't looking for proof of betrayal. I was just trying to distract myself to feel some semblance of control, but the transaction stared back at me like flashing red lights. A hotel charge on the outskirts of town. Dinner for two at a fancy restaurant I'd never set foot in. A florist receipt for a bouquet of roses I never received. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. That evening I waited for him. When he finally walked through the door, tossing his keys on the counter like nothing was wrong, I asked, "Who did you buy this?" Of raising Jacob while he second-guessed me, of standing by him through every doubt and cold shoulder. All of it broke loose. I stepped forward, my hand striking his cheek, before I even realized I'd moved. The sound cracked through the house. He staggered back, eyes wide with shock. My chest heaved, and I said through clenched teeth, "Don't you dare tell me it means nothing. You want to talk about lies, about betrayal. You doubted me, doubted Jacob, and when the truth came out, you ran. You have never been a father to him, not by blood, not by action, and now, not even by choice." His jaw tightened, but he had no words. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the door slamming so hard the windows rattled. For 3 nights, he didn't come home. Jacob asked where his father was, and I told him the truth. I could bear to say he's not here. On the 4th day, an envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a divorce petition signed by Thomas's attorney. No phone call, no conversation, just his neat clipped signature at the bottom of the page, as though I were nothing more than a contract to be terminated. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the papers. The tears came hot and endless. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the collapse of every dream I'd once held for a family that no longer existed. And yet, beneath the grief, there was something else, a strange, fragile relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to walk on eggshells in my own home. I didn't have to measure every word against his temper or wonder when the next cold silence would come. The man who had once stood beside me in a delivery room was gone long before the papers arrived. Now at least I no longer had to pretend he was still here. The day of the meeting came with gray skies and a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. Monica and I had chosen a neutral place, the park by the river where families usually gathered on weekends. It felt safer than anyone's home, less intimate, less threatening. But as Jacob and I walked down the path, his hood pulled up, hands shoved deep in his pockets, I wondered if any place in the world could soften what was about to happen. Monica was already there with Ryan. He stood beside her, lanky and restless, his hands jammed into his jeans. His eyes flicked toward us, then away, as if uncertain whether to stay or run. My stomach twisted. 2 boys, both mine in some way, both strangers to each other. We stopped a few feet apart. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant laughter of other children who had no idea how fragile a family could be. There was a mistake at the hospital, a terrible mistake. The DNA tests, they showed something I never imagined. You're not my son by blood, but you are my son always. Nothing can change that. He blinked at me, his face pale. Not your son. What are you talking about? You raised me. You're my mom. Yes, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. I am your mom. I've been your mom every day of your life. Blood doesn't change that. He pulled back, shaking his head. Then what am I? Who am I? His voice cracked on the last word, and it tore through me like glass. Ryan shifted uneasily, glancing from me to Monica and back again. He wasn't smug, wasn't angry, just bewildered as though he'd been dropped into a story he hadn't asked to be part of. So, she's my mom, he muttered, jerking his chin toward me. Monica touched his arm, her voice gentle. By birth, yes. But I've raised you, Ryan, just like Grace has raised Jacob. None of that disappears. The boys stared at each other for the first time, really stared. I saw the resemblance then, subtle but undeniable, the angle of Ryan's brow, the way Jacob's mouth twisted when he was upset, 2 halves of a puzzle that had been scattered for 15 years. But Jacob couldn't see it, not yet. He turned away from me, his shoulders hunched, his fists jammed deeper into his pockets. So I'm not yours, not Dad's. I'm nobody's. I reached for him, but he flinched. My heart shattered in my chest. No, Jacob, you are mine. Paper can't erase the years we've lived, the love we've shared. You are my son. He wouldn't look at me. His voice was a whisper, raw and jagged. Then why does it feel like I don't know who I am anymore? The question hung in the cold air, heavy and unanswerable. Ryan shifted awkwardly, staring at the ground. Monica's eyes filled with tears, and I, there on that gravel path with the river flowing silently beside us, felt the enormity of what we had uncovered. 2 boys standing side by side, yet oceans apart. Not brothers, not strangers, caught between two families, two truths, and two mothers who loved them fiercely. And as Jacob pulled his hood tighter and turned away, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after the park meeting were the hardest of my life. Jacob barely spoke to me. He kept his hood pulled up, even at home, retreating to his room, shutting the door, refusing to eat at the table with me. The house that had once echoed with his laughter was now swallowed by silence. I tried to give him space, but every night I sat outside his door, whispering through the wood, "I love you, Jacob. That hasn't changed. It never will." Some nights I thought I heard him shift inside, but he never answered. One evening I found him sitting on the porch steps, knees pulled to his chest. His face was hidden, but I could hear the tremor in his voice when he finally spoke. "If I'm not your son by blood, then who am I?" I sat beside him, close enough to feel his warmth, but not so close as to crowd him. "You're mine," I said softly. "Not because of DNA, not because of paperwork, because every day of your life, I've loved you, fought for you, raised you. Blood doesn't make a family, Jacob. Love does." He didn't look at me, but he didn't pull away either, and that was enough for me to hold on to. In the middle of all this, I met again with Christopher Lane. He laid out the papers neatly across his desk. "The hospital won't cooperate unless we push," he said firmly. "If you're ready, we'll file. We'll take them to court." I stared at the documents, at the neat lines of legal language, and felt the weight of every sleepless night, every unanswered question, every tear Jacob had shed in silence. "I'm ready," I told him. My voice didn't shake. "We go all the way. The lawsuit wouldn't give us back the lost years. It wouldn't heal Jacob's pain overnight, but it would give us truth, accountability, and maybe some small measure of justice." Weeks later, on a quiet afternoon, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees. The air smelled of cut grass and early spring. Out in the yard, Jacob and Ryan passed a basketball back and forth. At first, awkwardly, then with the easy rhythm only boys can find. They weren't brothers by blood, but neither were they strangers anymore. Just two lives forever, altered by a single mistake, slowly learning how to move forward. Side by side, I watched them, my heart swelling with something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I had lost a marriage. I had lost the certainty of who I thought my son was. But I hadn't lost Jacob, and I never would. I hadn't lost my strength either. I had faced the truth, no matter how brutal, and I had survived it. Some mistakes can't be erased. They scar the past. They alter the future. But scars don't have to define us. They remind us that we lived, that we endured, that we were strong enough to keep going. As the boys laughed quietly, the ball thooting against the cracked pavement, I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. Whatever lay ahead, courtrooms, paperwork, questions without answers, I knew one thing for certain. I was still a mother, and that was enough.